It is 1 p.m. on Wednesday, February 16, 2022. We will call to order this meeting of the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board. For the record, this is a Zoom meeting originating here from San Diego and around the state, primarily in Sacramento. We'll begin with item number 1, which is a roll call of board members. The chair is present. Vice Chair Reeves.
Present.
Member Eng.
Present.
Member Allen.
Here.
Member Kent Monning.
Present.
Let the minutes show that all members are present. Now we'll move to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes of our last meeting, the meeting of January 12, 2022. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, it's been moved that we approve the minutes from January 12, 2022. We'll do a roll call of members for voting. Member Reeves? I didn't hear you, Dan. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Thank you. Member Eng?
I vote aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
And Member Kent Monning?
Aye.
Okay, please, and the chair votes aye. Please show the minutes being adopted unanimously. Moving on now to item number 3, which is the chair's report. Just a couple of items. As I mention each month, for those who are watching for the first time, most of the board business is done between meetings. You'll get to see a little bit of what the board does for the next hour or so, but board members spend hours and hours between the meetings. And during the last month, board members resolved about 700 cases, which is a very good number, a lot of work being done. And there's a lot of positive news about our appellate operation and the work the board members have been doing. And we'll hear that from Jody Remke when she gives her report coming up in item 7. Again, as I mentioned, this is a Zoom meeting, but we're certainly hopeful now that we're getting close to in-person meetings once again. I intend to be up in Sacramento for the next meeting, although members will still be able to Zoom in next month. But we'll see when it is totally safe to resume in-person meetings. With that, we go to board members' report. We begin with Vice Chair Dan Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have a report this week.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Mr. Chair, I do not have a report.
Thank you, Mike. Member Allen.
No report, but as always, expressing my gratitude to all of the staff at all levels and to my fellow board members. We're doing our very best for the people of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair. No report. Just wanted to share my appreciation and excitement for the appeals system project update that we all received. It shows just a tremendous amount of work that people throughout the agency have been doing with sneak peeks and everything. So I just wanted to acknowledge all that hard work and say that it was wonderful to see that update. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, we're moving to item 5 on the agenda, which is public comment. Albert, do we have any members of the public who wish to address the board?
Yes, Chair Block, we have one member that wants to address the board, and that is Richard Miller.
Okay, thank you. Let me go over a couple of ground rules. The comments are limited to 5 minutes. I'll be timing it from my office here. In addition, it's important to note that this is public comment. It is not dialogue or question and answer, so board members will not comment or respond to questions or ask any questions. Staff will, however, follow up when they deem it appropriate after the meeting. But in terms of what's in this meeting, it will just be up to 5 minutes of comment by the participant. With that, let's go ahead and begin public comment. Mr. Miller.
Good afternoon, board members. You've heard me many times before. I continue to have the same concerns that I've applied for every judicial position offered by the CUIAB since 2017 and have been denied time after time. I've reviewed some of the documentation, and while I don't want to be at war with Mr. Silva and Mr. Kutri, I find that some of their treatment of me is not consistent with the merit system or the appropriate hiring procedures. I'm also concerned that when I've raised these concerns before, at one point, according to Mr. Kutri, he commented to the chair that,
Mr. Miller, we're not hearing you very well. Would you speak up, please?
I'm sorry. I'm concerned that in a letter or email to Mr. Block, the chair, that Judge Kutry indicated that concerning me, Michael Allen had asked why I wasn't being rehired, and that according to Kutry, he informed Mr. Allen that Miller had significant performances and that Michael did not want much detail and was satisfied with that approach, and that Judge Block also said we're handling the Miller situation exactly as we should. And I'm concerned that that seems to be the policy of Judge Block and Judge Allen and Judge Kutry, in that I've asked time and time again, after going through my official personnel file, I found only positive work performance evaluations. I've passed probations. I've done thousands of hearings. And yet somehow Judge Kutry has hung on to the position that my work is subpar and he does not want me back under any circumstances. That does not seem to be consistent with the board, the spirit of the initial comments by Judge Block that he would investigate and follow the letter and spirit of the law in the rehiring process. You've hired almost 67 judges or more. You've got 140 judges on board. You've hired another hiring, which I've applied for. And yet I don't believe I'm given fair consideration, even though I'm on a reemployment list with the CUIAB. I've got no negative reviews within my file from CUIAB. There were 15 cases from before Judge Kutry was PJ that he thinks I didn't properly attend to. One of them was a revision that called for a change in a date from June 6th to July 6th, or vice versa. That was the extent of a supposed revision that I didn't take care of. I did take care of those revisions, and they should have been brought to my attention when I was in contact with Judge Kutry within a few days after he allegedly found these 15 files, this box of evidence that no one seems to want to see and which he refuses to show to me. It's not part of my public record, and I'd wish you'd return to proper procedure and give me fair treatment and reemployment. I don't want to be at war with Kutry or Silva. They do good jobs on some things, but it's still incorrect and unfair to keep me out of the employment that I deserve, that I'm well qualified for, and not to look to other sources as Judge Kutry has done when he said that I was a problem even when I wasn't with the CUIB. Judge Kutry and Silva both found that I was failed probation with another agency, even though I got a positive merit service or salary adjustment with that other agency. So I'm hoping that Judge Allen will re-examine why I wasn't rehired and look at the actual substantial performance problems alleged by Kutry, but not shown elsewhere. So with that, I would finish my comments on rehire. I would also ask that sometime I get a response from somebody other than Mark Busan. When I send it to the personnel office, it goes back to Mark Busan. So I don't know who the personnel person is for the CUIB, but there should be somebody that wears that hat and wears that label, as opposed to it being passed back and forth between Kutry and Silva and Mr. Wu. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. That concludes. Well, let me ask first, Albert, is there anyone else in the queue waiting to make public comment?
Not at this time, Chair Block.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to item number 6, which is a report by our Chief ALJ and Executive Director, Mike Kutry. Mike?
Thank you, Chair Block. Good afternoon, Chair Block and board members. I will start with a summary of our workload and timeliness, give you some updates there, and then I'll discuss some other operational concerns we've had in the last month. With regards to appeal volume, we're continuing a slow upward trend of EDD appeals receiving at CUIAB as the EDD continues to address its significant deferred workload from early in the pandemic. Our executive staff continues to meet regularly with the department to gauge workload trends so we can best prepare for any increases in workload. Fortunately, this is a steady increase that we're experiencing now, rather than the sudden and massive wave of appeals that we received in the spring of 2021. In response, the field offices continue a high level of production, issuing over 23,000 cases, or decisions rather, in cases in January by way of increased case assignments and team calendars. So we are now through 10 months of the Department of Labor evaluation year. And in the vast majority of states, especially populous states, all timeliness measures continue to lag well behind the Department of Labor guidelines. However, despite significant challenges in staffing in January due to the Omicron variant, the CUIAB stayed nearly static in its time-lapse and case aging numbers from December to January. So through the 10th month of the evaluation year, the CUIAB has closed 8.1% of cases within 30 days, well short of the Department of Labor standard of 60%, but only a few percentage points lagging behind most populous states, and in fact, most states in the country. We have closed 10.9% of cases within 45 days, also well short of the 80% required by the Department of Labor, but again, only a few percentage points following most states in the nation. California's efforts to focus on the oldest cases continue to put California well ahead of the national average for case aging. In January, our case aging slipped 1 day, largely attributable to the staffing shortages that we encountered, while the national average went up 11 days. So we're now at 101 days, and the national average case age is 155 days. With regard to the COVID impacts that impacted us in December and January, we experienced something very similar to the national trends. We had a wave of COVID-19 positive cases and required isolations due to the Omicron variant. Since the last meeting, there were 5 brief office closures for cleaning after employees tested positive. And those occurred in Fresno, Inglewood, San Diego, and Sacramento. All reopened very quickly with a minimum of operational disruption to previously scheduled hearings. However, there are also dozens of positive tests and isolation periods required from in-office staff from the January wave, which impacted the office's abilities to promptly process the work that supports those hearings. And thus we saw a slight increase in our case aging due to mailing delays. So the offices continue to recover from those impacts, which have fortunately returned to relatively normal levels in February. And along those lines, today, the statewide indoor mask mandate has been lifted for vaccinated employees. Los Angeles and Santa Clara counties continue to require face coverings regardless of vaccination status. CUIAB offices in those jurisdictions continue to abide by the more restrictive face covering rules. Unvaccinated employees continue in the state's weekly testing protocol, which began last August and September. Another thank you is due to Administrative Services Chief, Mr. Silva. This was one of the most challenging months in terms of operational impacts in the 2 years of the pandemic. So thank you for your continued and constant attention to these issues. On recruitment, we continue to hire and onboard new judges and staff. The next cohort of judges is scheduled to begin on March 18th. The training staff continues to be led by Presiding Judge Bach, who has done a very impressive job bringing new judges along under these unique and challenging circumstances. As the complexity of the caseload changes, as EDD focuses on its backlog determinations, Presiding Judge Bach continues to develop additional training materials and programs to assist in their development. A huge thank you goes out to Judge Bach for making that as smooth as possible. An important item to follow up on from the last meeting. As you'll recall, in December, Appellate operations identified cases with audio deficiencies that required new hearings. So IT immediately set out to create an internal fix to stabilize those audio settings, which impacted a fraction of our machines, and to minimize the impact on the board appeal process. So to recap, initial patching was released in December by our own IT department. It was bolstered in the several weeks afterwards to ensure additional reporting and capturing of all the machines that were impacted. The numbers of cases requiring additional hearings continues to drop steadily, and fortunately makes up a very small percentage of the overall dispositions issued from November and early December. But nonetheless, as soon as those cases are identified, they are prioritized for immediate rehearing, so we can preserve all the rights the parties have to further appeal. So my appreciation goes out to the IT team again for its rapid action on this issue. It's constantly pivoting during the pandemic. It managed to address this issue quite successfully internally. So my deep appreciation goes out. I generally conclude with the security update, and fortunately, I don't have one for you today. It was a relatively quiet month. But I would like to finish on a more serious note and express my condolences to the family of Inland Legal Support Supervisor Nancy Chavez, who passed away earlier this month. She was a valued colleague and dear friend to the Inland office for over 20 years, and she will be missed by all those across the agency who knew her well over her many years of service to this agency in the state of California. And that concludes my report this month. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Are there any questions? We'll begin with Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mike, for that report, and thank you for your time this week regarding the recording issue. I'm going to reserve my questions for Jefferson on that topic. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Moving to Member Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cucci, for again making the rounds throughout the state during this very challenging time. It's very, very much appreciated. I understand that January was a very challenging month for CUIAB. Are you allowed to indicate the number of cases that tested positive?
I'll let Chief of Administrative Services Silva address that. I believe we can address that for you. He has better numbers than I do offhand.
Okay. I am still seeing a disappointing number of bad audio cases. Sometimes as many as I saw previously to the fix, and maybe I'm just getting all the bad ones. But I have a concern about how we are notifying those claimants that felt they already went through a hearing and perhaps might get a notice thinking that, oh, this is duplicative. And we as attorneys, we understand the wording of the remand order. But I wanted to know if we're tracking how many applicants have failed to respond to any of the rehearings, if any have been scheduled. Is that number available?
So the number is not, but the field offices, I can get the number for you. The field offices are ordered to follow up on any non-appearances to the new hearing. So far, I'm only familiar with one, and the party was successfully contacted and looped into the hearing in time. So all of the offices are aware that this is a prioritized issue, and that we are to pay special attention to ensuring those rehearing rights.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then issues about the positive cases and the vaccination policies will refer to Chief Silva. So thank you for your report. I appreciate it. I have no further
Thank you.
questions,
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Member Allen.
Yes, Judge Kutry, thank you for your report. I just have one follow-up question to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. I know that in the past we were receiving these huge tranches of cases, very large numbers. So what I'm hearing is that's no longer happening. We're just getting a more steady flow, and we're not going to be getting large amounts being brought over where suddenly we have hundreds of thousands more cases than we had before.
The answer to that is a cautious correct. We meet regularly with the department to find out whether there are any large bubbles of work that they anticipate completing, which would potentially result in a large number of appeals. So to give you a little bit of reference, we still measure against March of 2020 because that was the last month that we consider a normal transfer of appeals, even though that was relatively low over the years. And we've hovered between 40 and 90% above that over the last 4 months. But in spring of 2021, we were hitting monthly increases of 280 to 300%. So it's a dramatic decrease in the flow of cases. And the changes seem to be much steadier. There's smaller bubbles of cases that are coming over. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Moving to Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. Just a quick thank you, Mike, for keeping us apprised of everything. I know it was a very busy month, and I appreciate you meeting with the board members and talking through all of these issues with us. So thank you for all your hard work.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mike, for that report. We move on now to item number 7 on our agenda, which is a report by Jody Remke, the presiding ALJ for Appellate Operations. Jody.
Good afternoon, Chair Block and board members. I'm going to go over the Department of Labor guideline and standards for January 1st for us. And then as requested last meeting, I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison from the board level versus the national higher authority level. And that will be for December 2021 data, because that's all I had available. But starting with the January numbers for the board, we continue to do well with those cases closed in 45 days or less. As you know, the guideline is to have 50%. We are at 90.9%. Cases closed in 75 days or less, again, the guideline being 80% or more, and we were at 99.4%. Our case aging average days of those cases pending is 30.3. So again, the board is still in a really solid position right now. And I think that is also illustrated when we compare California to the national averages. As I said, this is doing a comparison of December 2021. The 45-day time lapse, the national average was 44.2% of the cases met the 45 days or less. Again, the goal is 50%, and California was at 92.5. So we're far exceeding the national average. 75-day time lapse, the national average of the cases meeting that 75-day was 63.9% of the cases, with the standard being 80% or more. California at 99.3%. So again, still doing very well. Case aging back in December, the national average of pending cases was 96 days. And in California, ours was as low as 23 days. So again, in all areas, we are exceeding the national averages, as we've talked about, and those are just giving you some more specifics based on a snapshot. But looking at other months, it's pretty similar throughout the year for 2021. And that is all I have, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that good news, Jody. And before we take questions, I want to congratulate and thank my colleagues on the board. You guys are knocking it out of the park. We are so far ahead of most of the rest of the country that it's a testament to we know our staff does a great job, both in the field offices and our central staff, but I think it's important for the board to get recognized too for just outstanding work on the cases you're handling. So again, thank you. And now, are there any? I don't see Jody in the picture anymore. So, and here she is. So now, are there any questions or comments for Jody, starting with Vice Chair Reeves?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Thank you, Jody, for that presentation. I really appreciate you providing us context about how the appeals function is performing vis-a-vis the other states. I think that's really important information. And I think it's a testament to the hard work of your team of administrative law judges that are prepping these cases for us, who do an outstanding job. And I want to thank all of them for that work. And of course, my colleagues who are so good to work with. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Jody, Judge Remke, thank you for providing the guidance to the board members. I have a particular question that will probably be receding as an issue, which is that in terms of those cases that are not eligible for regular UI decided at our level, but which may be eligible for pandemic benefits. Because of the deadline issue, I'll just speak generally, and if this is something you'd prefer to respond to offline, I would appreciate it. But I wanted to find out, does EDD have a policy of monitoring our decisions? For example, if we indicate that the claimant may be eligible for pandemic benefits, notwithstanding the deadline, I just wanted to find out whether there is that layer of oversight, because sometimes the language, as I have referred to earlier in the decisions, may or may not be instructive to claimants who may not understand legalese.
Sure. I mean, I can speak to the general law, and then I'm going to unfortunately kick it to Chief Kutry if he knows of any EDD policy in particular. But when someone is denied regular UI, the states are required to consider whether or not they were eligible for PUA at that time, depending on the time frame. So that's why we're putting in that general language and advising the parties to contact EDD where we think it's appropriate. So not just solely relying on EDD, as you know, but I'll let Chief Kutry answer if he knows any particular policy the EDD is following right now.
With regard to our decisions, the policy is to parse out the decision language, particularly at the end of the decision and the conclusion, and to implement accordingly. So the language that many of our decisions leave us with is that the PUA eligibility should be visited by the department. And that is an appropriate referral to make without deciding the eligibility of the PUA issue, which is not in front of us, but the possibility that PUA eligibility could be established by the department. But to answer your first question, the department does read our decisions in order to implement them.
Yeah, thank you for that response. It does address a concern that I have, that many times we put the burden on the claimant, and I understand putting the burden on EDD at a time when they have so many burdens is burdensome in general. But given the fact that we have reached a deadline on the applications for pandemic benefits, it would behoove us to reinforce that policy, that EDD review the decisions. And what I needed to know was whether they affirmatively contact every applicant every time there's a decision that indicates you may be eligible for PUA, or whether it's just left open as a matter of their general policy, and then we kind of take them at their word. And if it is something that they do on a case-by-case basis, I would like to know how many cases they've actually contacted the claimant because of the deadline.
To the extent I can get that information from you, I'll look into it. Because EDD is a party, we may not be privy to much of that. But there may be published materials that I can access and research for you to see if I can answer that for you. It's a highly legitimate concern, and I also would like to know.
All right. Thank you, both Jody and Michael. I have no further questions.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mike.
Chair. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from Member Allen?
Yes, Jody, thank you and your judges for all the good work you do at our level. And of course, it is always appreciated. I think mainly my comments are, given the long baseline I have of experience of working with fellow board members, I'd really like to thank all of you for your patience and attention to detail, and also the unspoken acknowledgement that we are patient with one another to seek out all the details to make sure that we're getting these cases right. So I just wanted to thank my colleagues for being so concerned with not only meeting timelines, but trying to get the very best possible information to make our decisions. And that's a very good work ethic, and I want to thank you for it.
Thank you, Michael. Member Ken Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. Well, Judge Remke, thank you for that extra research comparing what our agency has been doing to the national landscape. It's nice to get some of that good news. And like my colleagues have said, I just truly appreciate all the hard work that everyone does at the appellate office and preparing everything for us, responding to our questions. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to work with everybody and hope we can keep up these good numbers. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Also want to thank PJ Bach because she did the training of the board members, and you guys clearly are on the same page and understand the case law well enough that you function like quite a team. I handle cases where there's disagreements, and those have gone from being plentiful to being rather rare, and that's a good sign. So Becky, if you're watching, thank you. And now we move to item number 8 on our agenda, which is a report normally by Jeff Willoughby, our Chief Information Officer. Jeff's not able to be with us today, so instead we're going to hear from Information Security Officer Sonia Teamer. Sonia? Sonia, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for that, letting me know that too. Good afternoon, Chair Block, members of the board. My name is Sonia Teamer, and I am CUIB's Information Security Officer. And I will be presenting the IT report on behalf of CIO, Jefferson Willoughby. I'm pleased to report that we are completing the 11th of 13th planned sprints and are preparing to enter the user acceptance testing for our modernization project. During this period, subject matter experts have opportunity to exercise our new system from beginning to end and work out issues prior to the vendor's delivery of the product. In parallel, we will continue to work with operation groups on development and preparation of training material. As reported last month, our teams are working to deliver more robust and reliable networks to support our field offices. Our first site should be active next week, and we will report on progress as this initiative unfolds. In closing, I would like to just remind everyone that relations to secure our information's assets, a layered defense is the only viable defense. Therefore, thank you, Chair Block, members of the board, and my fellow CUIB employees for continuing to do your part to keep California citizens' information safe. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay, now we'll take questions or comments for Information Security Officer Teamer, beginning with Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Sonia. I hope you're well. I did have some questions for Jefferson, but I don't think it'd be fair to ask Sonia. Those questions, they have to deal with the procedures for detecting those bad audio cases as quickly as possible. So I will just redirect my questions after this board meeting back to Mike to have a follow-up conversation that we had earlier this week. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Member Eng.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for joining us, Security Officer Teamer. I just had a question. I was pleased to receive the Appeal System Modernization Project update, and I noticed that we're at stage 6. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about stage 6. I believe it was sprint 11 is what I was informed of.
Oh, we are? Okay.
Yes, sprint 11 out of 13.
Okay, well, when I got indicated that, well, I just wanted to ask on the issue of the training, which was at stage 6, whether, when and whether, if you know, the CUIAB board members will receive the training with regards to the modernization project, if that's known.
I don't know of when you'll receive it, but I do know you will receive training as well.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that because we receive routine notices for training that are outside, that were possibly intended for other members of agencies within or other departments that did not apply to us. And so I just want to make sure that I don't miss this most important training, which I'm very excited to receive, and I'm often not excited to receive requests for training, but I just wanted to make sure that we received it. So maybe a request that it be somehow highlighted, maybe put do not delete or something like that in the heading. I'm just kidding, but something that would make it stand out. I think members, you know, we receive requests for classes and whatnot, and then when we check on it, it wasn't applicable to the board. But anyway, with that request, I have Nothing further. Thank you.
Well, I will make sure that we're noted that when we send out a request, to make sure we can identify a way that it stands out from all the other training notices that you receive as well.
Thank you, Mike. Moving to Michael Allen.
Good afternoon, Sonia. I just have one question. I'm assuming, and I shouldn't assume, so I'm asking this, was it pretty seamless, the rollout of the two-factor authentication? I know for me, I'm pretty much untrainable, and I was able to do it pretty painlessly. So I was just wondering if it was seamless.
Having worked in other agencies where we've had quite a few rollout, I will say, yes, it was. You know, we expected phone calls. We expected some people that need a little bit extra assistance, and we did. We even anticipated that there might be one or two things that we weren't looking for specifically to happen, and we managed to handle those as well. I want to say the last numbers that I had seen was maybe 5 or 6 cases where people had a little bit more than what we were ready for, and staff was able to work with them and get those situations, get them handled quickly. I even have to thank the judges that were willing to come into the office at a quick notice in order to be able to resolve some of these issues. They were more than willing. We didn't have any pushback. So it really was a good experience, and it was seamless.
Well, thank you. I only struggled for a couple of minutes, so thank you.
Very good, Michael. Thank you. And moving to member Ken Monning, Laura.
Thank you, Chair Block, and thank you, Security Officer Teamer, for joining us today. I appreciate you standing in for Jefferson. I wanted to also just give a shout out to Rick Freeman, who helped me with my issue with the two-factor verification. I had the misfortune of needing a new cell phone like 2 days after I set it up, which caused a few wrinkles, and he was available immediately, worked it out for me. So thanks to the whole team for rolling that out with our large agency. I'm sure it's no small feat. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And with that, again, thank you for me as well, Sonia, for pinch hitting here. We now move to item number 9 on our agenda, which is a report by Rob Silva, our Chief Administrative Services Officer. Rob.
Thank you, Chair Block. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm going to start with a report about our internal budgeting process. And on January 27th, we released the personnel and operating expenses budget call letters for the upcoming 2022-23 state fiscal year to all management of the 18 CUIAB cost centers. This is our annual process of providing the opportunity for each branch to submit budgetary requests for the upcoming budget year and play a role in the budget process. We do have a handful of new support supervisors in field operations that don't have significant experience with this process. So over the past couple of weeks, both Valerie Graziano of Administrative Services and I have been working closely with them to assist them so that they can properly complete all of the requests for both their staffing and equipment needs for next fiscal year. The due date for the 22-23 budget request for field operations is this Friday. We will then consolidate the requests of the 13 field operations cost centers and submit the data processing requests to IT for their review next week. Once they review, they will either approve the data processing requests as appropriate for our IT environment, or they'll respond with alternative solutions when applicable, and also weigh in on any peripheral needs that may not have been identified in the initial data processing request. After that point, Thursday, February 24th, the remaining budget call letter requests from the non-field operation branches are due to administrative services. Quick hiring update with regard to support staff. We currently have 13 positions pending in field operations, all of which had final filing dates over the last 3 weeks. So even with the high workload they're dealing with, offices appear to be keeping on top of the hiring as attrition and promotions are taking place. We are running up on some limited term employee anniversary dates because in early 2021, we began to onboard employees in both ALJ and support positions as 12-month limited term appointments. So over the first quarter of this calendar year, we've started the process of extending limited term appointments for an additional 12 months or converting positions to permanent full-time where the geographic workload and attrition warrant that. And on again to one of my least favorite subjects, which is COVID-19. I did report back in last meeting that 33% of the total number of CUIAB employees that had tested positive for COVID-19 since the onset of the pandemic had done so over the preceding 6 weeks from that board meeting. Unfortunately, the trend of positive cases has continued, and there was actually a slightly higher number of CUIAB employees that tested positive over the 4 weeks following the last board meeting than the preceding 6 weeks. Chief Kutry reported that we had 4 different office closures for COVID-related cleaning, and in each of those instances, we were able to secure same-day cleaning. And in 2 of the instances, we were able to secure the cleaning with really only a couple of hours notice. So property management for our leased facilities has been very responsible in working with us in those situations to get our offices up and running as quickly as possible. Going to report on the new supplemental paid sick leave that's available. It's almost available. On February 9th, Governor Newsom signed the new supplemental paid sick leave bill, and it becomes effective on February 19th. There's a slight difference in the supplemental paid sick leave program for 2022 from the program of 2021. And that's that last year's program, a full-time employee could be eligible for a total of 80 hours of SPSL for an assortment of COVID-related reasons. This year, the total of 80 hours has been split into 2 separate 40-hour buckets. In one bucket, there is 40 hours of leave available specifically if an employee tests positive for COVID-19. The other 40-hour bucket of time would be for other COVID-related reasons, such as if an employee is subject to a quarantine period, has been advised by a healthcare provider to isolate, experiencing illness from a vaccination shot or a booster, or has to care for a child whose school or place of care is closed for COVID-related reasons on the premises of the school or daycare. This supplemental paid sick leave is retroactive to January 1st, 22, and we're currently working with EDD's Human Resources Services Division on the forms, the approval process, and the coding for our time reporting system before we can begin to offer it to employees. Once everything is in place, I'll work with local management to assign this leave retroactively over the last 7 weeks for qualifying employees. In the categories I mentioned, there are a lot of intricacies that would provide that an employee would or would not be eligible given certain circumstances. So there's going to be a lot of outreach to local management to make sure that it's handled correctly. And I intend to start by joining Assistant Director Kratol in one of his management meetings with field operations. I haven't told him that yet, but now he knows, so that we can get word out there. And I just want to make sure that the legal support supervisors, they have so much on their plate already. This is just difficult for them to kind of work their way through this minefield. So we'll help them out with that. And that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Questions or comments for Administrative Services Chief Rob Silva, beginning with Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Rob, for that detailed report. I'm still trying to digest all the COVID news. I'm hopeful that at the next board meeting, the numbers will be significantly different. And I'm happy to hear that the supplemental sick leave has been approved, and our employees who did get sick and have gotten sick will be able to use and rely on that sick leave as opposed to some sort of vacation time. So I don't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Moving to Member Eng.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Silva, I'm going to follow up on an earlier question I had that was directed toward Chief Kutry. I'm I understand that there was an uptick in the 4 weeks following our last board meeting that exceeded a time period of 6 weeks or other in the past, if not the entirety. Are you at liberty to say how many positive cases?
Through the, since April 1st, which is what I'm considering the beginning of the pandemic as far as we're concerned, we've had a total of 79.
How about the recent one, the uptick? What was the number of that?
In the last 4 weeks, it was 22.
Okay, and is there an explanation for that? I know we're not public health officers, but I was just curious. Any type of uptick is very concerning, especially when we have to close field offices. I was wondering if you.
Well, other than
that.
stating that it's somewhat mirroring what's going on elsewhere outside of our agency, that's really the only explanation I have. There isn't. We still in our offices are adhering to social distancing practices and obviously the mask mandates that were in place up until today. And there's no, categorically, with the way it's happening, there's no real way to pin it at unvaccinated employees versus vaccinated employees or anything like that. It just seems to be mirroring what's happening in the remainder of the state outside of our department.
Well, just as a follow-up, since you mentioned it, what is the percentage of vaccinated versus unvaccinated in the last of the 22? And are you at liberty to disclose that?
Well, with the 22 you're referring to, I will say that, well, I have some data here. Over 85% were vaccinated, had provided proof of vaccination.
So over 85%. So I see. So these are breakthrough cases, which is very concerning. Okay. Let's see. And my last, thank you for that factoid. This is a question that has continued to confuse me. If those individuals that tested positive, the 22 that you referenced, or anyone else, again, because of the changing scenarios with county and state mandates, what is our requirement for someone that's tested positive in order for them to return to work?
If someone is tested positive, regardless of vaccination status, they are to remain away from work for 5 days, isolate. If on day 5 or after they can present a negative test result, they can, and their symptoms are receding, they can return to the workplace. If they can't do that or choose not to do that, then they can't return to the workplace until the 11th day after their first symptoms, and provided they've been fever-free for the preceding 24 hours.
I hope this is all on some website because it's very complex. And one final question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
What
Mike.
is in terms of the testing before the employee returns to work, who provides that test?
We are to provide that test, and it's specifically in the new supplemental paid sick leave law that was enacted. There's a specific clause in it that states that we are to provide a test to the person who we need to test on that 5th day in order to provide a negative test to return.
Okay, and given the fact that we've had rising cases, can you comment on the adequacy of our stockpile right now, what it is, and whether it's gone up or gone down, and what our contingencies might be should they have gone down?
It's getting more and more difficult to, well, first of all, I'll just say straight, we're unable to stockpile the tests. We just received an email late last week that superseded an earlier email in which we used to be able to order a 6-week supply, then it became a 4-week supply, and now we're only able to order a 2-week supply. And by 2-week supply, that's for if I'm an Office of Appeals and I have 4 individuals that are part of the testing protocol, that means I can order 8 tests at a time. And the state's testing task force knows how many people that are under each cost center. So they're disallowing us the ability to, and understandably so, to order more than that 2-week supply. As far as a contingency, if we are to supply testing to someone and we're unable to do so, and they have to pay for a test, they can be reimbursed for that test through, it's CalAIDers Global, through the state system. They can submit a claim and be reimbursed if they purchase their own test in the event we're unable to provide them with one.
And that's assuming they can even find the test, which
Correct.
I understand in some areas. Okay. All right. And so we'll be notified if ever there's a possibility or in reality where the tests are not being able to be provided to the employee and the employee is unable to secure them. Is there a process for that?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
In other words, say
question.
we run out and the employee has to test and they can't find a test. Do they have recourse there at all?
I don't know, other than going to a healthcare provider or a drugstore, which they would have to pay for the test and we would have to reimburse them. That would be, other than taking an at-home test, that would be one thing they could do. But we haven't
reached that. We haven't reached
We
that.
haven't yet.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And hopefully with the cases going down, we'll have less of a need for that. I just wanted to know what the contingencies were, and you've explained that. Thank you, Rob. I have nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Moving now to Member Allen.
So Rob, could you describe to me the steps you've taken to include everyone in the agency and at all levels in the budgetary process?
Sure. Again, just to reiterate a little bit of what I said earlier, we send to all management in late January documentation to submit for staffing, as well as ongoing operating expenses and any furniture equipment needs, with the instruction that they're to reach out to all of their respective staff to see if there are any true needs by them. So the staff submits it to the management submits it to administrative services. So in theory, everybody should be involved in this process in the department.
Rob, would it be possible for you to check in with your managers and find out what in fact they're doing? You know, this is something I've always been concerned with, because it's been my experience that the more we can make sure that everyone within the agency has access to be able to input into the budgetary process, it solves problems later on, and also sometimes is very helpful to feeling being part of an agency by making sure that they were consulted. And I guess we won't be getting a budget for us for adopting till after the May revise. Is that correct?
Yeah, typically around August is when we will do that. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I know this is a hobby horse that I bring up frequently, over the years, but it's based upon my experience dealing with organizations that there's a much stronger feeling of affinity and being part of an organization when they're consulted individually regarding their needs, so that everybody can get what the tools they need, whatever they need, the training they need, so that we can be giving everybody every opportunity for training and advancement. So thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Moving now to Member Kent Monning.
Thank you, Chair Block. Just a quick appreciation, Rob. It's apparent how much is on your plate and how much you've been doing. And I heard in your report the lens of you wanting to further support staff members throughout the agency, because you're recognizing how much they have on their plates. And I think that is a wonderful lens for you to have. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that is appreciated by people who work at our agency. So in your time of being so busy, I heard that, and I just want to acknowledge that. And I really appreciate that that's your lens, as everyone has so much on their plates right now. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Rob, for your report. That is the 9th and final item on our open session agenda. My understanding is we have no closed session items today. Is that correct, Chief Counsel Wusam?
That's correct, Chair Block.
Okay, since there are no closed session items, if there's nothing else for open session, we will adjourn this meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone.